Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're not looking at business workflows as some abstract theoretical concepts mapped out on a whiteboard. We're looking at them as living organisms that need protecting. And just like any organism, a business can get sick. Our focus right now is a core, somewhat brutal principle from the negative price standard. Negative price lets you fire what burns value. So let's step into the operating room.
Let's kick this off with a pretty direct question. If a process actively destroys value, why on earth do we keep it around? I mean, let's be totally honest with ourselves. Nobody actively enjoys rework. Literally, no one likes slow approvals, broken handoffs, or those completely useless meetings that just swallow hours of your week whole. We all hate bottlenecks, and yet normal businesses keep these habits running for years. Why do we tolerate it?
The answer is actually startlingly simple. It's because the loss hides. Businesses don't keep bad processes because they love being in pain. They keep them because they simply cannot see the loss clearly. The disease is camouflaged.
You see, value destruction rarely shows up as a giant flashing red warning light. To most teams, it just looks like, complexity, or maybe tradition. But when you peel back the layers, the reality is constant delays. It's repeated rework masquerading as iteration, and totally unjustified steps. People tolerate it because they excuse it as just being part of the job. We all know the pain of sitting through an hour-long meeting that could have been an email, right? That's the disease growing right there in the details.
Section 1. Loss becomes an invoice, the consequence of missing value. Now, a normal business can pretend things are fine. They can brush it off and say, well, we're just busy, or our industry is complicated. But when you apply a negative price ultra guarantee, what we call -1, the game completely changes. Because missing value suddenly demands accountability.
Under the -1 standard, if value does not arrive for the customer, the seller pays. It's that simple. Loss is no longer just internal friction or some vague feeling of inefficiency. Loss becomes a literal invoice the seller must pay out of pocket. That useless meeting isn't just an annoying calendar issue anymore. It might be protecting indecision that breaks a promise which literally costs you real money.
That -1 standard is diagnostic. It's like injecting contrast dye into a patient's bloodstream. It forces the business to become a surgeon, because when loss costs you money directly, you suddenly demand mapped workflows. You demand tracked numbers. You demand defined proof points. You can't just guess or rely on gut feelings anymore. Which leads us to a terrifying but absolutely necessary question. Should this process still exist? Without -1, you can patch dead-end processes forever with workarounds or temporary internal fixes. But under -1, patching becomes far too expensive. Every patch that fails can create missing value, triggering a financial penalty. You have to challenge that instinct to just patch things over.
So, what do you do when you find these dead ends? You fire them. But let's reframe that word. Firing is not rage, it is precision. This isn't about emotional anger, generic cost-cutting, or HR layoffs. It is the surgical removal of whatever damages your promise to the customer. You fire a bad step, you fire a useless report, or you fire a broken tool to protect the value. Section 2. The fire or fix map. Isolate the disease. Okay, let's dive into the practical, clinical framework for doing exactly that. Because this is how you systematically isolate the disease in your workflow. Here's the sequential process. It's a remarkably clean formula to evaluate any loss-making habit. Step 1. Find the loss. Look for repeated rework, margin bleed, or customer confusion. Step 2. Name the disease. Is it busy work? Is it a handoff failure? Step 3. Locate the bottleneck. Where does work wait, or where does proof disappear? A bottleneck is a concentration point for missing value. Step 4. Define the proof. What exact evidence shows this burns value? And finally, Step 5. Choose the operation. Once you isolate the disease, you have exactly 5 acceptable operations on the table: delete, redesign, automate, retrain, or stop promising. Notice what's missing. There is no option here for ignore it or create another workaround. Let's briefly zoom in on that first operation, delete. You execute this to remove a step when it creates no clear value, reduces no meaningful risk, and survives entirely by habit. Many businesses keep loss-making habits just because someone created that process 5 years ago. But under -1, nostalgic protection of past workflows has zero place. If it doesn't protect value, you cut it. Then there's the ultimate discipline. Stop promising. You must stop selling an outcome you cannot reliably deliver until the system is ready. Look, this is the adult move. Sometimes the problem isn't the team, it's the promise itself. If you cannot prove the value, you have to stop selling the promise. No more excuses, no more sacred waste.
Because if you refuse to execute these operations, the consequences are grave. Section 3. Precision over slow collapse. The cost of tolerating disease.
An organism might look totally fine from far away, but refusing to fire loss-making habits leads to a slow collapse. The symptoms are pretty stark. Margins shrink, trust decays, your top talent burns out, customers lose patience, and the day-to-day work just becomes heavier. A business might not die overnight from one dramatic, cinematic failure, but it becomes incredibly fragile because it just keeps tolerating small diseases. That's exactly how -1 trains the business to stop protecting comfortable dysfunction. It forces you to stop saying things like, well, we need this weekly meeting, and start demanding proof by asking, wait, what actual decision does this meeting produce? Instead of shrugging and saying it's complex, you ask, where is the bottleneck? You stop tolerating the problem and start demanding evidence of value.
So, how do we bring this surgical theory into reality? Section 4, the -1 diagnostic. Expose value destruction. Let's talk about the practical tool to actually find that loss.
This whole principle originates from Negbook, which is the first book in the world with a negative price. The core premise is absolute. Either you read the book and it helps you, or you read the book and it pays you. That's not just a decorative marketing guarantee. It acts as a brutal forcing function. Because if the seller has to pay out of pocket when value is missing, the seller is forced to find what burns value in their own system.
To apply this exact thinking to your own workflows, the -1 diagnostic helps you examine whether a controlled negative price standard could work on a real offer without gambling your entire company to find out. It identifies measurable promises, pinpoints bottlenecks and repeating handoff failures, spots repeatable parts to automate, and sets up controlled pilot tests. You don't just slap a -1 tag on a sick workflow and hope courage fixes it. You diagnose it clinically first. So, what's your primary takeaway here? If your business is tolerating broken procedures, useless reports, or bad habits, don't use another motivational slogan. Start by finding the loss and deal with it. You can apply for the -1 diagnostic at nagbook.com/negative-price standard. I want to leave you with this final staccato mandate for operational precision. If it burns value, fire it. The very next time you're stuck in a useless meeting or dealing with a messy, broken handoff, ask yourself, are we just calling this part of the job, or is it finally time to be a surgeon?